not going to be blowing anyone's minds here when we say that the PS2 has a vast library of games, unless you're that one guy who drew the line at Fantavision and is now the video game equivalent of that Japanese World War II soldier who chilled in the jungle for like 30 years. It's one of those statements that everyone immediately agrees with, like F-Zero deserves a real new game, or pineapple doesn't belong on pizza. With well over 1,000 games on the PS2, naturally a good portion of them have been remade over the years to make the most of new hardware, but there's plenty of others that we reckon could shine with a proper second chance. Narrowing down the PS2's library to just 10 games that could use a remake is a herculean task, and we're definitely going to have missed a few of your favourites. But for this list, we're trying to focus on games that either didn't receive enough love on the PS2 when they came out and could do with another shot in the sun, didn't release in the West to begin with, or games that would genuinely benefit from the power of more recent hardware to truly execute the game's original vision. With that in mind, let's talk about the 10 PS2 games that actually deserve a remake. But first, for just a handful of the King's Coins or a Freedom Buck, you could become a cultured Vultures hatchling by becoming a YouTube member. You get absolution for any ad block and also early access to at least one video every month. Check it out down below. Number 1, RAD, a Robot Alchemic Drive. If you watched our hidden PS2 gem underrated bangers video extravaganza, whatever, you will be familiar with this game. For everyone else, you are in for a treat. RAD is a pretty accurate name for what the game is about, because playing as a giant robot who has to beat the crap out of aliens is pretty rad no matter what. As seen in classic movies like Atlantic Rim and Ape vs Monster. RAD Robot Alchemic Drive has giant kaiju action in spades, but the real gimmick to the game is the fact that you're controlling both the mech and the pilot separately, with the pilot forced to follow behind the mech, setting themselves up at a decent vantage point while trying to avoid being crushed. RAD is a prime candidate for a remake due to the fact it's a pretty obscure game already, but with an amazing gimmick that could be explored further on current gen hardware. A more densely populated city with better graphics would really help sell the vision of RAD, but what would really improve the game is some enhanced destruction effects. It feels like there hasn't been many games that really let you loose on a huge city on current hardware, so now's the time to change that. Also, this never came out in Europe. That's BAD bad. Number 2, Resident Evil Outbreak. We've spoken in the past on our long dead website about whether or not Capcom should do something with the Resident Evil Outbreak series, and the answer is that they absolutely should. Capcom has been killing it when it comes to the remakes of classic RE games, but they've also been missing the point entirely when trying to turn RE into a multiplayer game as well. Instead of simply being made into a better game, Resident Evil 3 came with Project Resistance, a pretty weak Dead by Daylight-esque clone, which nobody forgets, while the less said about RE-verse, the better. Meanwhile, the ideal solution for Capcom has been staring them in the face this entire time, and by this entire time I mean like 20 years. Just remake Outbreak. It's been that simple the whole time. An online multiplayer horror game for the PS2, Outbreak was years and years ahead of its time, especially considering the PlayStation Network as we know it today hadn't even been conceived at that point. The emulation community has kept Outbreak alive in more recent years, but with the runaway success of the Resident Evil games anyway, particularly with the over-the-shoulder remakes, perhaps remaking Outbreak in that same style with some of the lessons learned from live service on Monster Hunter would lead to the next big Resident Evil hit. You could even release the maps from Outbreak File 2 as post-launch content as well, or you could put Billy's tattoo in as like a DLC skin or something. I don't know, this writes itself, guys, come on. Or you could, you could get infected, and then you could like have to hide it from your friend, and you could turn it into like a multiplayer online Among Us kind of Resident Evil campaign where one of you's infected the whole time. It writes itself. Number 3, Urban Rain. The PS2's library of beat-em-ups is, well, it's huge at least. We wouldn't go so far as to say it's absolutely brilliant, considering that said library includes stinkers like Final Fight Streetwise, Beatdown, Fists of Vengeance, and Death by Degrees. However, there's some real bangers in there too, like God Hand, Mortal Kombat, Shaolin Monks, oh my god what a banger, and Urban Rain. Ash wants me to remind you that the bouncer has been underrated this whole time, which has also reminded me to find a cure for rabies. While all 3 could be ported today with just a simple resolution update, and in the case of Mortal Kombat and Urban Rain, online multiplayer, we reckon Urban Rain could do with a bit more of a remake. It's not because the gameplay of Urban Rain is bad or like aged or anything. If anything, it's one of the smoothest, most fluid and easiest to play brawlers on the PS2, if, ever. A remake of Urban Rain would do well to keep the gameplay pretty much the same, but it's the graphics where Urban Rain could do with a bit of a overhaul. Considering this PS2 sleeper hit was created by the same team who created Tekken, with Paul and Law even appearing as guest characters, it would be amazing to see Urban Rain given the same coat of paint that Tekken 8 received, without, all that bollocks afterwards. Ugh. Number 4, Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Despite being one of the most popular and recognisable superheroes in all of fiction, the Incredible Hulk hasn't been blessed with a lot of open brackets, good, close brackets, video games. Much like Superman, given his nigh invincible power, it's hard to actually have him as a balanced protagonist, so he's often reduced to a background or side character, which is enough to leave us in an incredible sulk. To date, there's only been one good Hulk game, and we won't be arguing about that, and that's Ultimate Destruction, which actually focused on what mattered when capturing the essence of Hulk. Smashing Scarlett Johansson. Sorry, just smashing. Just smashing. Following a similar story to the Ed Norton film, years before that mostly forgotten but generally quite good MCU entry was even released, Ultimate Destruction sees Banner struggling with his angry alter ego, while an irradiated Emil Blonsky is dealing with an abomination of his own making. While the main missions don't extend beyond go there and smash that, it'd be amazing to play a Hulk game with proper open world city destruction, or with Tim Roth from the 2008 film returning to play Blonsky. This might also be a bit of an obscure pull for some, but a Hulk game using the destruction engine and physics seen in Frontier Scream Ride would actually be incredible. Yeah, I did say it was a pull. Scream Riders, scream if you love riding. Wait a minute. Number 5, The Thing. Licensed games were 10 a pence on the PS2, and while most were trash, see most games based on kids films, there were a few golden nuggets to find. The Warriors from Rockstar, EA's take on The Godfather, and Scarface by Radical Entertainment all managed to expand on the mythos of the original properties while providing an entertaining game in their own right. But if there's any film tie-in game that deserves a full-on remake, it'd have to be The Thing. Considering the novella Carpenter's movie was based on has been remade a number of times already, remaking the PS2 game seems like it's within the same wheelhouse. An incredibly ambitious horror game for the time, The Thing on PS2 was set after the events of the Carpenter movie, with players controlling Captain Blake as he tries to determine what the hell happened on this remote outpost. The answer? Shape-shifting aliens. What made the thing so unique were its NPC interactions, with multiple classes of characters accompanying Blake throughout the game, along with mechanics such as fear, trust and infection determining how effective NPCs are, whether they suspect you're the thing, or whether those friendly NPCs are actually infected and will try to eat you later on. Cue the Imposter Among Us music. Give it some modern controls, a multiplayer mode, some next-gen body horror graphics, and this would be a real whipper. But who's the better mascot? The Bean People or this slightly under-the-weather dog? Number 6. State of Emergency. Admittedly, doing a remake of a game that simulates Riot might be a controversial one, given how much general discontent there is in the world at the minute. Listen, pineapple doesn't naturally belong on pizza. It doesn't go there, right? Because wets shouldn't go with dries, but it just works, alright? It's an abomination, but it's our abomination, you know? But State of Emergency is absolutely a game that was failed by the technology of the time to execute its vision. At its core, SOE was a beat-em-up that saw a group of resistance fighters known as Freedom inciting some riots across the UK to try and take down the corporation, which is about as cookie-cutter as dystopian fiction gets. I mean, you might as well call them the good guys and the bad guys. What makes State of Emergency a pretty interesting remake idea is the idea of a fully interactive world to mess around in. During the original game, it felt like most of the horde of people you were a part of were just set dressing rather than actual people you could interact with. Basically, we'd want a game that truly simulated the chaos of a riot, so you could be chatting to some guy about their beliefs one minute, then F5ing them off the Capitol building the next. But make sure it's done in a silly way. If we have to sit through another wave of headlines about some evil game that lets you open fire on a group of digital people who don't have any feelings or agency whatsoever, we might just lose our minds. But if all went well, we might even put the remake in a follow-up to our best Rockstar Games video if it let you customize your own protest signs. That'd be pretty cool. Number 7. Shadow of Rome. Despite the fact that, according to the National Library of Brain Rot known as TikTok, men think about ancient Rome more than they think about their own family members, I am more of a Babylon guy myself. But there really hasn't been a lot of games set during the time period. There's your usual crop of management games, while titles like Civilization give reference to the time period, but for those who want to be boots on the ground during the reign of Caesar and the like, there's not that much to choose from besides Rise Son of Rome. It's why Capcom would be able to corner a gap in the market pretty effectively by remaking Shadow of Rome. An action-adventure epic, Shadow of Rome tells a fictionalized version of the infamous Ides of March, where Caesar was introduced to a bunch of pointy things. You play as Agrippa, whose father was framed for the assassination, who now has to survive the gladiatorial gauntlet, and Octavianus Octopus, who tries to prove the innocence of Agrippa's dear old dad. A remake would be a boon for both halves of Shadow of Rome. Agrippa's combat became the inspiration for Dead Rising, a series that we're pretty keen on here, so Capcom could perhaps use the more modern Dead Rising engines and tech for some bloody combat, while Octopus's stealth sections need all the improvement they can get, for real. There's only so many times that weak little twink can get stabbed by guards before you start bashing your head against the wall. Number 8. Under the Skin. You might be thinking that Capcom has appeared quite a bit on this list, and that's fair enough, but when you've got a back catalogue as vast and varied as theirs, it's only natural that a lot of them would actually make for excellent remakes. We've also not taken the coward's way out and put God Hand on this list. Of all of Capcom's PS2 games, however, perhaps none are as weird and experimental as Under the Skin, which has absolutely nothing to do with that Scarlett Johansson film of the same name. It was a different kind of weird and experimental, though both did involve aliens landing on Earth. And that's the second time she's been brought up just in this video. Playing as a cute little mischief maker called Cosme, you travel to Earth in order to, well, make mischief. Across the game's 8 levels, you disguise yourself as one of the humans, then use their unique abilities to cause chaos in some form or another. That's the basic premise, and while it's about as simplistic as it gets, some new features like online multiplayer could help this remake achieve additional success. Plus, one of the levels is a parody of RE3 Nemesis, so think what Capcom games and Under the Skin remake could parody a second time around. You could have a rhythm level based entirely on Dante's dance in DMC5. What's that? You'll take 7. Yeah, us too. Number 9, Obscure. Ah yes, the PS2 game that's been brought up so many times on YouTube.com over the years that we can't even make the obvious joke about its name anymore.
I'm not doing it. I don't even want to be around anymore.
There have been a lot, and we mean a lot, of horror games that have tried to walk along the same trail that Resident Evil and Silent Hill blazed, and as you'd expect from copycats, most of them failed. However, a couple of them at least tried to do things a little bit differently than its forebears, with Obscure being the prime example of this. While you can play both Obscure and its sequel right now on Steam, both games are prime candidates for a remake, as again, they're pretty novel for the horror genre. Taking inspiration from schlocky B-movie horror flicks, Obscure sees a bunch of teenage students dealing with a mutant infection that's causing havoc in their local high school. Players can switch between 5 different characters throughout the course of the game, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and players could even plug in a second controller to continue the game in co-op. Update the controls and chuck some online co-op in there, and an Obscure remake would be a real treat, especially as we don't really have enough co-op horror games that aren't asymmetrical horror. What's that? They're making Ice Cream Man into a multiplayer horror game? How brave! Number 10, Namco Cross Capcom. Look, we promise this wasn't bought and paid for by Capcom. Promise. They're still mad at us for not giving Exoprimal 100 out of 10. And hey, at least this one was published by Namco, eh? Yeah. Anyway, good remake candidates are games that never received a full launch across the entire world, with Monolith Soft's Namco Cross Capcom being a prime example. A strategy game featuring all of the best and brightest from both of the Japanese publisher's biggest franchises, Namco Cross Capcom is considered a bit of a precursor to the popular Project Cross Zone series on the DS, but NXC never made it to Western shores. Maybe it's time to change that. In fairness, history has been kind to Namco Cross Capcom in the West thanks to the work of passionate fans who have managed to release English patched versions on emulation websites, but it'd be great to see both companies work together again to create a crossover as big and bombastic as Namco Cross Capcom. It can't just be Fortnite that has all the crossovers now, guys. If nothing else, it'll probably be better than just another Street Fighter cross Tekken, which isn't hard, and we'd be able to see some truly ridiculous matchups. If your head went straight to Ivy from Soul Calibur versus Lady D from RE8, congratulations, you won one free trip to Horny Jail. Bonk. And that was our list going over just 10 of the many thousand billions of PS2 games that we think deserve, nay, need remakes. What did we miss? What was not on the list that should have been on the list? Should we never have stopped talking about Rad? Let us know in the comments down below. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, and thank you for watching.